I just came back. I left in December.
The crucial years, huh?
Yeah.
You came in December. After things improved a bit.
Yeah, on the surface at least, they've gotten much better in the last couple of years, year and a half, couple of years.
Hello. If everybody would move in, if you have any empty seats, we have people who are waiting outside to get in. Thank you.
Does everybody have the right name tag? The right nameplate?
I have mine.
All right.
So, are you based in Washington? Where are you based?
Yes, in Washington, D.C. You're in New Jersey, huh?
Yes, I am in New Jersey. I've been with Seton Hall now for
Have you been here before, Jim?
To the conference?
Yes.
No, but I actually wrote a thesis on this campus.
Again, wave your hand if you have an empty seat by you, please.
So it's a bit of a return for I've never been to this conference before.
You will. And I'll introduce in that order. Good morning. It appears that we have more than a full house. So given the fact that it is 11, we will begin and hope that others who can't find seats will be at least comfortable on their feet. I am the moderator of this panel, absent a nameplate, but my name is Linda Jorgensen. And I will introduce the panelists briefly because your programs have very, very good and complete bios. So I will be brief and we'll introduce our panelists in the order in which they will speak. And so we will begin with Saad Eddin Ibrahim. He is an Egyptian social scientist and democracy advocate, currently a visiting professor at Indiana University. He's a strong human rights defender, was imprisoned by President Mubarak between 2000 and 2003, exonerated by the High Court there, but nonetheless has been pursued by the Egyptian government since then because, I presume, of his pro-democratic values. Our second speaker is James Glanz. He joined the New York Times investigations desk in February after stepping down as the Times bureau chief in Baghdad. In 1999, he joined the Times as a science reporter and reported on the structure of the Twin Towers, before that fatal day. He has worked ever since on stories about that, and that is his background there. Ziad Asali is a medical doctor. He got his MD from the University of Beirut Medical School, and is and started the American Task Force on Palestine in D.C. He is a member of the bipartisan interfaith leadership group in the U.S. Engagement facilities. Is my microphone not close enough? Can you hear me now? All right. Azmat Hassan is a professor at John C. Whitehead School of Diplomacy and International Relations, Seton Hall, New Jersey. He was foreign minister in Pakistan and head of the Middle East Division, 1991 to 92. 1994, he was a secretary to the Prime Minister of Pakistan. And I will let you read about their complete occupations as you like, either as they speak or later. We will begin then with Mr. Ibrahim.
Mr. Ibrahim, my name is Saad Eddin Ibrahim. As the Madam Chairperson said, I am an ex-convict. Now I'm a fugitive. And as a fugitive from justice, because there are sentences pending all over my head in my native country of Egypt, I go wherever there is no extradition treaty. And before I came to Colorado, I asked, is there any extradition treaty between the state of Colorado and Egypt? And I was told no, so I came. I have a lot of fond memories of this campus, because it is on this campus that I was elected when I was a student as the president of the Arab students in North America. This was back in 1966, before many of you were born. So it brings back good memories, but also since that day of being a student activist, I have been in trouble with every Egyptian president, starting with Nasser, then with Sadat, then with Mubarak. And the press in my country called me a serial dissident. The word serial was always associated in my mind with rapists or killers. But now, in the Egyptian press, I'm called serial dissident. Having said all of that, I would like to address the theme of our panel, winning hearts, minds, and souls of the Muslim world, assumingly by Americans or by an American president. And to my gratification this morning, reading the New York Times, I think President Obama has done the job that I'm supposed to tell him how to do it. He seemed to be naturally gifted for sensing what is really to be done to communicate with the world, especially in part of the world that the approval of the United States was at its lowest until 3 months ago. We have Gallup poll, we have Pew, we have several public opinion agencies doing surveys around the world, periodically monitoring and measuring approval or disapproval of the United States and of other countries as well. But since we are here, the results about the United States is really to be looked at. And as I said, the lowest of all the regions of the world, and of course my colleague here, Jim, is coming from Baghdad. He would probably can tell you more about the inside picture. And the disapproval of the United States is basically disapproval of its foreign policy. Not of America itself, not of Americans. Because in the Gallup poll, for example, and there is a book that was written recently by Professor Esposito and Professor Dalia Mgahed titled, "What Do the Muslims Really Think?" And it cites these figures, but it also, once you get into it, it tells us that most Muslims, and the surveys was done in about 16 or 17 Muslim countries, Muslim majority countries, ranging from Indonesia, Far East, all the way to Morocco in the far west of the Muslim world. And here is what you get. You get this reaction to disapproval, and once you go beyond the disapproval, you say why. They will cite a number of reasons, but at the heart of it is that American foreign policy, one, is double standard, is not consistent. Two, has been unfair, totally unfair to the Muslim world, but especially to the Palestinians, followed by its invasion of both Iraq and Afghanistan. So the average Muslim, when asked why he or she disapproves of the United States, they will cite a list of grievances, but at the top of them is Palestine, followed by the invasion of Iraq, followed by the invasion of Afghanistan. Other than that, the fourth reason is because the US government supports dictators in the Muslim world. So when you have a sample of average citizen, they disapprove also of American support of tyrannical regimes in their midst, including my own. Mubarak gets $2 billion a year as a foreign aid. There's nothing more supportive to a tyranny or a tyrant than getting that kind of money. So getting that kind of money, he takes it to be an approval of his regime. And just as an example, and I'm sorry to concentrate on Egypt since I'm an Egyptian, he is the third longest ruler in the 5,000 years of recorded Egyptian history. The first longest was Ramses II. Have you heard of Ramses II? Ramses II ruled Egypt for 46 years. And then followed by somebody called Muhammad Ali around the turn of the 19th century. He ruled for 42 years. Followed by the third longest, Mr. Mubarak, for 28 years. And worst of that is that his father died at the age of 90. So that family is known to have longevity. And even worse than this and that is that he's grooming his son to succeed him, al-Assyrian style, Assad after Assad. Therefore, when people have reasons to believe that the US is unfair to them, there is good grounds for it. However, in the middle of the questionnaire, say, all right, you disapprove of American foreign policy. Is there anything you like about America? Most Muslims would say yes. We like American democratic system. We like their love for freedom. We like their technology and their science and their educational system. Good. you go beyond that. As a sociologist, I used to do that all the time. Whenever you see findings like that, you say, all right, existentially, what do people really think of Americans beyond answering the question the way that Gallup and Pew would report them? So I have two simple tests. One is called the embassy test. And the embassy test is to go around cities like Cairo, Damascus, Beirut, Jakarta, and to see where the longest line is for visas. You go around different embassies, you find invariably, despite the disapproval rate of the US, that the longest line seeking visas is in front of the American embassy. So there is some kind of, on the surface of it, a disconnect, ambivalence toward America. So disliking American foreign policy for the reasons I just gave, but liking certain things about America also for reasons I just gave. Democracy, freedom, science, technology, education. And therefore, for the things that are likable, there is invariably the longest line in front of the American embassy in every Muslim majority capital to come to America to study for medical reasons, for business, for entertainment, for all kinds of things. So that is what Obama had to work with, to target the Muslim world, to tell the Muslim world, it is not, Americans don't hate the Muslims, America is not in a war with the Muslims, America has that kind of, what did he say? He said today, according to the New York Times, he said, we are not at war with Muslims, we are not going to use the war against terrorism to make it a war against the Muslim world. And we are seeking interest, and we are going to treat the Muslim world with the due respect that they deserve, that among Americans, that are many Muslims, that he himself is partly a Muslim. He comes from partly a Muslim family. And by saying all of this, his approval rate has jumped steadily over the last 3 months or the last 2 months since he came to office. And according to my center, the Ibn Khaldun Center in Cairo, that approval rate of America, because of him, has jumped from something like 20% to something like 60%. I don't know the latest, but I wouldn't be surprised that it probably after this trip and after that speech in Ankara, in Turkey, a Muslim majority country, I wouldn't be surprised that his approval rate will jump even higher. And therefore, this is a moment where Mr. Obama can address the legitimate grievances of the Muslim world, and he's qualified to do it, fair-minded to do it, and I think he has enough American support to forge ahead and to address, especially the Palestinian question. And as I said in a panel yesterday, we do not lack schemes to deal with that problem. What we lack is sustainability, determination, and fair-mindedness. And if he does that with the Palestinians, I think he can regain all the Muslim world, a Muslim world, by the way, which was the first country to recognize America as an independent country was not France, it was Morocco. The Sultan of Morocco did the recognition. It is true, his letter of recognition arrived about a week late than the French. But the date of the letter, for you, for the historians among you, predates the French. So we have that legacy. The Muslim world had admired America for far. It began to sour, the relation began to sour from 1948 after the establishment of the State of Israel and the siding with the State of Israel, and then further military incursions in the Muslim world. So there is a moment that we can all celebrate that there is a possibility with a president like Obama that this kind of positive relationship between our people and you can be restored and can flourish. And with that, I thank you very much for listening.
in these economic times, I should probably mention that the article by my colleague Helene Cooper, my colleague has just mentioned, is at www.nytimes.com.
Good.
Feel free to look at it. I don't have the deep knowledge of the Muslim world that my colleagues here have, but my modest experience is that I've just spent about 5 years in Iraq. Went over there as a correspondent in '04 and stepped down as bureau chief at the end of last year. I've been to virtually every part of the country. As bureau chief, I ran a newsroom and a compound that included 120 Iraqis, from security personnel to translators and fellow reporters. And in the course of all that reporting, I had years of extensive contacts with Iraqi political figures from the north, south, all across the country, Kurds, Arabs, Muslims, and Christians, and had a lot of contact with just ordinary citizens on the streets of Iraq. We were able to get out, and many times we were, as well as from small villages to the big metropolis of Baghdad. And so I think what I'll try to do is just share whatever wisdom I've gleaned from that very direct experience, and see whether there's anything there that generalizes to this overall issue of winning hearts and minds in the Islamic world. On a day-to-day basis, working with Iraqis, most of whom were Muslim, not all. We had Christians in our newsroom as well. It was a very palpable reality and very obvious whether you had won hearts and minds on a given day, because you were working together on stories, relying on some very fine journalists and other professionals to help you get those stories in a country that, especially at first, was a complete mystery to me. And you knew whether you had done a good job with your, say, Iraqi relations that day, because you either produced the news or you did not. You were on your own. And that close collaboration, just as over here when you're working with a colleague from day to day, you find out an awful lot about a person that way. And I think the first lesson I learned when I went over to Iraq is that it's a much more complicated issue than it looks like from afar. For one thing, someone may be a Muslim, maybe a Christian, but that's just one element of that person's personality, whether it's a friendship or a professional colleague. If you try to reduce everything to religion, you're going to run into a roadblock right away, because that's not all that makes up a person. A person may be a sports fan, a person may be somebody who likes Saddam, a person may be somebody who likes to talk a lot or is quiet, maybe from a religious family, or maybe somebody who really dislikes religion, just like here. And all those things often play second fiddle to just your love of the work. In our case, it was going out reporting facts, gathering them as accurately as we could, and putting them together in a story. And on a working level, of course, we hired people who loved to do that. They knew a lot about the Muslim world, but that didn't determine their every move. And I think that's one mistake it's easy to make from afar, is to try to reduce everything to a dialogue on religion, because just as even devout Christians here don't plot out their every move in a given day from the Bible, a Muslim doesn't plot out his every move from a passage from the Quran. And just to give some idea of how complicated it is, now talking about this wider issue of my dealings with Iraqi society, I agree with my colleague in that you'll find that the stance in the Muslim world on American foreign policy is an entirely different thing from how they feel about Americans. Americans actually have a lot in common with people in the Muslim world, where there are lots of, I have a physics background, I wrote a physics doctorate on this campus before I became a journalist, and there's an amazing amount of things you can find in common with people in the Muslim world. I happen to often open a conversation with some issue of science or engineering because there are an enormous amount of talented engineers in the Muslim world, particularly in Egypt and also in Iraq, who at one time sort of vied for this as being the center of professional life in the Middle East. Egypt has taken the lead at this point. To just explore a few of those complexities, you'll very often find that when you're dealing directly with your friends in the Muslim world, at first it seems like a monolithic thing that you want to try to figure out what the accepted behavior is in that world. You want to say hello in Arabic and goodbye and show them respect and sort of assume that everybody wants the same thing, but you'll quickly find out that people are as much individuals there as they are here. And a really common experience that I had there in Iraq, where strict adherence to Sharia law and some of the more, the tighter restrictions veiling women, for example, is fairly new, especially in a college setting, let's say, university setting like this one. Didn't see that 20 years ago very much. Now it's pretty common. You'll start a conversation and you won't really know what the person thinks about that, but eventually you may find out that you're talking about somebody who really wants to vent about what he or she sees as an unjust progression of new rules that didn't exist before and that limit their choices and how they dress and how they behave. And you may end up having a conversation in which once the person trusts you, you'll find that he or she is very relieved to have somebody safe, you might say, to vent about that issue, and it's a way to get to know a person. There's a lot of secular people in the Muslim world, and that's something that you should always remember. Another complication, you'll meet people on the Sunni side of the equation. Now, the Sunnis are a minority in Iraq, but they were in power for all those years, and essentially, it's maybe oversimplifying, but Saddam's regime was a Sunni-dominated regime. And many of the Sunnis who were in power, in Iraq at least, were conditioned by Saddam-era propaganda and who knows, maybe elements of reality to dislike the United States and see it as a big source of problem in Iraq, an enemy, somewhat the way that it's seen, at least politically, in Iran. And very educated people will honestly believe that and harbor a deep resentment for the United States. And again, at first that seems like something that's really impenetrable, that you can't get around. But when you start talking even to people like that, you'll find that they're often very educated, cosmopolitan people. Those are the people who benefited a little bit from having been in sort of the ruling class, traveled. And in fact, that part of their personality, it may be something you'll never understand, you'll never be able to cope with, but it's sort of compartmentalized off in their mind. And you'll start to find common interest and find that you really actually enjoy having a conversation with a person like that and vice versa. In fact, one of my newsroom chiefs was in that category. He was a sculptor during the Saddam era, enormously talented man who took up journalism because it was a way to make a living, one of the few ways to make a living after the invasion in Iraq. Became a good friend. Eventually, I and others helped him get a visa to the United States. And he never really has renounced those views that the U.S. is basically an evil force in the Middle East, but we sure had a good time at an Egyptian spot on Avenue A in Manhattan smoking hookahs a few weeks ago. I love those Egyptian spots. They're great. He lives a kind of a life now where he appreciates all those things about America, the ability to do what you want, freedom, and the intellectual life of the United States is one of the things he loves. And he'll have to come to grips with, as a lot of us do, with a part of his personality that doesn't have much to do with the life now that he's chosen in the United States. And among my devout colleagues, we had a very diverse newsroom. I insisted on having it be fairly balanced, men and women, even though that's a little bit unusual in Iraq. We had, by the nature of the job, we needed to have diversity because we needed to be able to reach into all elements of Iraqi society. And one of the fascinating programs there was always making sure that we had some talented veiled Shiite women in our newsroom, so I got to know a lot of those as well. And that's a very hard element of Muslim society for an American to come to grips with. It's just there's not many analogs to that in American society unless you know Muslims already. In fact, I remember once we threw a party at the compound. It just so happens for historical reasons there's actually a pool in the back, and I insisted that everybody go swimming, which was, I don't know if that was crazy or what, but eventually we got all the staff in. A lot of them swam with their clothes on, but of course the veiled women wouldn't do that. And it seemed like such an amazing juxtaposition, but actually they were having a good time. You know, they just wouldn't swim. And I've also found that some of the veiled Shiite women who came into the newsroom were amazing workers, enormously educated, very restrained, but grateful for the chance to show what they could do. And just, you know, we had a sort of a mixed society there. It was sort of half Western, half Iraqi. So they were a little bit free of some of the strictures that they lived with in their family life and in the society in general. And I think they sort of liked that. They sort of liked coming in and knocking out a story, getting a source we didn't have before, and contributing to the whole operation. And that was, again, aside from whatever religious sect they were, it didn't matter much, except that sometimes that gave them special access to certain aspects of Iraqi society, and we sure took advantage of that when we could. So I guess my message is that, you know, it's the mistake that's often made here, and I probably made it too before I went to Iraq. Don't reduce people to the few things you may know about one element of their lives and personality. Here it's religion. It's very important. It's more important for some people than others in the Middle East. But I just think there are many ways into finding things in common, finding ways to communicate with people in other cultures, and you discover those things as you spend time in a place like that. And I guess I'll leave you with this thought, which is that there's a lot of dialogue now, for good reasons, about this issue in the United States. And I'm glad about that. I'm happy. Whenever I came back from Iraq, I'd come back after a rotation, especially during the most violent times there, and I'd be exhausted, I'd be semi-traumatized, I'd be cynical beyond belief, and really wanted to just sit in the sun and kind of recuperate. But I actually always appreciated it when people asked me about my experience and wanted to know what I'd been through, and I thought that was a productive thing. But I think even more productive in this time when there's a lot of talk about the Peace Corps and the mission of the United States abroad, and as the President makes clear that the mission of the United States abroad is not going to end now, in fact it may expand, that I urge you all to find ways to go out into that world, because I don't really think you're going to understand these things fully without having dealt with them firsthand. And the United States is such a presence internationally, and political decisions here have such an impact on so many other places. I think it's incumbent, maybe not on everyone, but to as many people who can, to go abroad, spend some time over there, and find out all of these things for yourself. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's very good to be with you, very good to be in Boulder, Colorado, a place we used to visit, my wife and I, when I did my residency training in Salt Lake City, Utah. Spend a few days in Boulder, deposit the kids for a couple of weeks, and then come back and collect them. We've had that as a tradition. It's always fun to come back to Boulder, and it is a pleasure to come back to your conference. Our topic today is really how to win the hearts and minds of the Muslim world. You cannot do that without something of a context. And by way of context, very brief, because I really want to be prescriptive as much as I can to answer the question, is to understand what this Islam thing is about, what is the Muslim world is about. You need to know, for instance, that every single government in the Arab Islamic world, all the way stretching from India to North Africa, and even to foray in Spain for a few hundred years, every single state and government was established based on Islamic legitimacy, on a relation with the Prophet Muhammad. Somebody would be the cousin of a cousin of the Prophet, and then he would start a state somewhere in Punjab. So this is so deep-rooted. It lasted till the 20th century, that all governments were built on Islamic legitimacy. In the 20th century, you had other modes based on Arab nationalism, and et cetera, et cetera. So anybody who offers himself or his group as a leader for the Muslim world wearing an Islamic garb would have historic resonance. It is not something that's conjured up in the air. We need to know that. We need to know that in the text of what we call political representation. Who represents a group? Who represents Muslims? Who are the real Muslims? Now, there is absolutely no possibility of an answer as to who are the real Muslims. I hear this all the time. Who are the moderate Muslims, the radical Muslims, the militant Muslims? And they're all of the above. They're just as varied as can be. You have 1.2 billion people across the world with 55 different countries now. 55 different countries that are Islamic countries. And as you might imagine, they have so many different forms of governance as well as social and cultural relations. But more importantly, throughout the ages, people have actually assumed control of states under Islam, and started absolutely outrageous things, like abolishing marriage altogether and having communal wives and having, the most restrictive, ostensibly kind of a religious culture about women has allowed for hundreds of years a state that exists like that. So let us be very careful about this idea of a monolithic view of Muslims. I often say, well, I'm a Muslim. Of course I'm a Muslim. I was born in Jerusalem. My family lived in Jerusalem for 600 years, and we're Muslims. But frankly speaking, I don't think religion plays a whole lot in my own personal life or several members of my family's life, and we're just like everybody else. I'm also practice medicine, and I have a husband and have interest in literature and so many other things, parts of our identity, as you so aptly mentioned. We all have many identities. To reduce individuals to a single identity is a disaster of the first magnitude. And unfortunately, after September 11, the people who committed the disaster of September 11 were all Muslims, and I think it cannot be hidden, and it should be admitted more by Muslims than anybody else that they were Muslims, and they should be denied the right of representation rather than hide the fact, no, really, they are radical Muslims, they're extreme Muslims. They're Muslims. They're a variation on the themes of Muslims, like in music. You have all kinds of variations. But the problems with the Muslim world, between the Muslim world and the West, are, age-old. And, but they've been in contact always. Europe and the Middle East are much too close. They've had all kinds of contacts, positive and negative, all the time. But they're not alien. They're not just far removed, as other continents were from each other. And colonialism, which was basically a forceful utilization of people's resources and lives, et cetera, lasted for, maybe 100, 200 years in most of the Arab and Muslim world. And it certainly left its residue on both the occupier and the occupied, the colonizer and the colonized. And the United States has inherited, and this needs to be said, a certain legacy of that. It's an extension of the European legacy, although not direct, never direct, but culturally appreciated, and we need to appreciate that. Now, having said all these things, what we actually have now is a myriad of political problems. There's no way on earth that you can generalize about the relation of the United States with the Muslims globally, as I said, because you have so many countries with so many needs, and all of these are political problems that reflect themselves in a relation of power and in the way of life of these people. You know, what's happening with their economy, what's happening with their education, what's happening with their healthcare, what's happening in their cultural life, all across the board. There are all kinds of exchanges, possible or not possible, friendly or inimical, that have to be analyzed and considered. And as I was testifying before the Congress in February, and the subcommittee on the Middle East about the restitution to Gaza, etc., after the destruction. And the chairman of the subcommittee, Gary Ackerman, asked me, how do you help moderate Palestinians? How do you help moderate Palestinian leadership? I said, the way you help them in the United States. You know, you give pork to your constituents. And, you know, so he said, what, here a Muslim telling a Jew to talk about pork? The minority leader, who was, let me not name him, he was just a vanilla, you know, a congressman from the Midwest, said, what's going on here? So this is very important. You need to understand that you need to improve the quality of life of these people and the political relation. If you understand anything about this issue and consider religion as a variable, no more than a variable. Now, the other issue that's related and very important in my view is the issue of dignity. Just precisely of the previous history that I just briefly mentioned. The relation between the West and the Arab and Muslim world has lacked, at least has been perceived acutely as lacking in dignity in part of the Westerners vis-a-vis the Arabs and the Muslims. It's uneven, and it is hurtful, and it rubs them the wrong way, even if somebody means well and, you know, come and I want to do, you know, help you with the school system. It's perceived as at best condescending, and at worst very coercive and abusive. You cannot solve, and this is such a deep and fundamental issue in the equation that we must all understand. What I like about the new president is that he understands perfectly what this means. The first telephone call that he made within 24 hours after he became president was to Abu Mazen, the president of Palestine. The very first phone call that he made for overseas, anybody, any leader. The second day, then he appointed George Mitchell to concentrate on the issue of Palestine as an envoy. And the third thing that he did very quickly, within the first week, was to talk to the Muslim world and the Arab Muslim world. The first interview he offered, I'm sorry, it was not to Sun Times or anybody, but it was to Al Arabiya. And it was to address the concerns of the Arab and Muslim world. All of that is in the worlds of symbolism. Nothing substantive was done, but it's just giving this respect, the sense that, you know, I understand what's going on, and I want you to know that I understand, and I want to extend a hand to you, and it's an outstretched hand, it's not a clenched hand. Now, this is exceptionally important. Add to that his speech in Istanbul yesterday, where he specifically addressed Islam, and he said America will never have a war with Islam or fight with Islam. There are many issues that separate us, but we will pursue those on the basis of mutual respect, mutual interest, and mutual understanding. This is just like people treating each other as grown-ups, you know. It's basically what it is, and it is that. There are issues. I mean, who can visit any place in the Middle East and not just, you know, wonder what the heck is going on? Why don't these people get it right? Why don't they do this and that? Well, they've inherited a very bad history, let me tell you that. And they are living under many coercive regimes, as Saad has so aptly mentioned in his own personal experience. And it is a fight. And it is a fight where the West has not been perceived as helpful. We need to remember that. And it is very important to change this equation. Three more points that I want to mention. And one is the very issue of the metaphysics and the theology involved. Now, I'm all for dialogue and interfaith and all good stuff like that, and it is important, and we must spread it as much as we can and should. But this is not a theological war. This is a political war. This is about, land and exploitation and economic relations and trade and many, many complicated things that are very, very worldly of this earth. You use theological text to explain or explain away or to use in your argument for very worldly things. And I think that should be kept in mind. And to find something new, terrible in some kind of an ayah in the Quran, which says, you can find things everywhere. Those things, those issues have existed for millennia, and it is not very smart to dwell on differences in the text. The second point that I think is relative to our discussion here is the toxic public discourse. There's no other word for it. Toxic, poisonous public discourse, where what I call Al Jazeera Fox syndrome. You will demonize the other consistently, predictably, and all the time. And the other is going to come and kill you. You said that tribe over there is so terrible, they're out to get us. And that, they'll be discussing music and talking about something that implies that. This cannot be sustained. And this, in fact, is something where we, as just, people, can be more assertive and fight back. And within each tribe, this side of the aisle has to do something, and the other side of the aisle, it doesn't do very well to have somebody just express an opinion criticizing the other side. You have the courage, a rare commodity, unfortunately, everywhere, especially in politics, to criticize your own side. I think that has to happen, and I think more voices have to be calling for, a meaningful exchange of ideas and actions rather than characterizing motives and pointing the other as motivated by animosity. One more is the centrality of the issue of Palestine. I have since I quit practicing medicine and started concentrating my efforts on Palestine, once more in my own mind, in practice, affirmed the centrality of this issue for the Arab and Muslim world. Do not be tempted to downgrade it. Now, we've just had a war in Iraq, a war where, thousands upon thousands of people got killed, and resources, and it was many thousands in the United States were killed also. But this war will go through, and will be gone. There'll be some memory of it, and it's okay. It's still going on, by the way, in case you forgot, and it won't. But it will not leave anywhere near a mark on the consciousness of the Arab and Muslim people globally, like the issue of Palestine. That is fundamental. Resolving the issue of Palestine has something to do with what I call dignity. That struggle is about real estate and dignity. The real estate can be resolved by getting enough money from Manhattan and Abu Dhabi to buy it out, but not the dignity. The dignity issue is central, and there is an injury to the psyche of Arabs and Muslims globally that cannot be redressed if the issue of Palestine is not resolved. What do I say needs to be done as a policy by the Obama crowd, which clearly, as you said, does not need advice, but it doesn't hurt? A policy of benign engagement. Benign engagement. That's the recommendation that we make. Across the board, from politics to business to trade to cultural exchanges to health, etc. It's a benign engagement. This is an area of the world that has nuclear potential as we speak. You know, it's not just about being nice and good guys. This is a problem. It's a problem for all of us. We have to isolate the bad guys. But only Arabs, Muslims can isolate the bad Arabs and bad Muslims if that is given a chance. You know, enough of this rattling sabers and giving people lessons, okay? It is a mutual lesson. All of us are in the same boat, and I think, I hope, and I expect that we have already started. Thank you.
Good morning, and it's a real pleasure for me to be back for this very important conference. This will be my 4th visit to Boulder, and I've continued to enjoy each visit more than the last one. I think this is a relatively important subject, winning Islamic hearts and minds. But beyond that, I think there is a need to win hearts and minds between the North and the South. The North being the developed world, and the South, of course, being the vastly underdeveloped or developing. Underdeveloped means that, you know, you need to do some exercises and lift some weights. So I'm sorry if I use that term, which is no longer very much in vogue. The developing world. And you can get an idea of the state of human development that the globe is in by looking at the annual report of the United Nations Development Program with all the statistics. I think it's a wonderful document. I recommend it to my students, and I would recommend it to anyone that I come across, and I would certainly recommend it to you. The Islamic world is a part of the developing world generally. If you look at the United Nations Development reports, the UNDP, United Nations Development Program reports. And the focus in the United States really has come after 9/11. Before that, I think there was very little sense among the majority of us here, living and working in the United States, about the Islamic world. What does it mean? So naturally, we fell back upon stereotypes about the Islamic world. We identified the Islamic world with Osama bin Laden and those 19 hijackers. Well, we were on a steep learning curve. Hopefully, 8 years after that terrible event, that tragic event, we now are in a position to fill more gaps. And I am optimistic, because I personally think that we do not have to reinvent the wheel. We just have to look at the reports which have already come out as to how to engage with the Muslim world, what are the things that need to be done so that we can develop a more equable relationship and eventually a more harmonious relationship. There was the Jirijian report. Ambassador Jirijian was in Syria, and I also knew him as a colleague in Damascus many years ago, about engaging with the Islamic world. The Iraq study report. There is a report which Madeleine Albright was involved in, which came out only in October or November. So there is a lot of material. I think the challenge before the Obama administration, and he's absolutely on the right track by trying to whisk away a lot of the misunderstandings which have been created sometimes by, in the previous administration, that there is no animus against the Islamic world. There is no need for the United States to go to war against Islam. But then we have to look, what is the perception by Muslims at large? And the perception is that Iraq was invaded, Afghanistan was invaded. There has been talk that Iran will be invaded to stop them from a bomb that they may be building. and so on. So it does appear to the average Muslim, who obviously does not have the benefit that all of us have of education here, that maybe there is some kind of a war developing against Islam. So that perception has to be removed. And it has to be removed on the field through implementation. Of course, good sentiments are very important, but it is through implementation. And I can quote to you the example of Greg Mortensen. I think you might have read his path-breaking book, 3 Cups of Tea, where he has set up a series of schools in Afghanistan and Pakistan to show that he is committed, he is involved in bringing education. Education is a deficit, by the way, in many Islamic countries, if you look at the human development statistics. How can the United States give an earnest demonstration of its commitment to improve its image and to win hearts and minds? Through practical measures, by reinvigorating the United States Peace Corps. Imagine 10, 15, 20,000 young Americans out of university spreading across the Islamic world and other parts of the developing world, and giving 1 or 2 years of their time working with the most deprived sections of the societies around them. I think it will have a huge impact. Of course, as my colleagues have stated, solving some of the political grievances, whether it is the Israeli-Palestine question, whether it is Kashmir in South Asia. I'm from South Asia, so I'm quite, perhaps a little more sensitive about Kashmir, and Chechnya. Some of these issues, if the United States takes an impartial attitude, immediately the graph of the American government and the American people will go up. In any case, there is no inbuilt animosity or resentment about the American people on a one-to-one basis. I think in the Muslim world, the Muslim peoples, the Arab and Muslim peoples, all realize the innate goodness of the American people. So with more emphasis on implementation on the ground of practical measures, I think the United States can make a very big difference, and a more normal relationship can be created. Thank you very much.
Questions?
This is where the courage is needed.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you all, Ms. Nathan, for the analysis that you have given. And you went into many intricacies and many details. I apologize, I forgot my prosthesis at home. I could not speak very clearly. I am a U.S. citizen from occupied Galilee in Palestine. I do not believe Israel has the right to exist as long as I, as Palestinian, do not have the right to have my own state in my ancestral land. As long as I was one of the most moderate on American campuses since 1962, I have never accepted the idea of fanatics Palestinian, Muslim, or Arab. I define Jewish state. I define Muslim state. I define Christian state.
Excuse me, sir. Do you have a question?
I will have a question if you will be patient enough.
Excuse me.
My question.
Do you have a question for one of our panelists?
In English. Thank you. I like to ask all the speakers to dwell on this item. Racial profiling that I, with my American-born and raised wife, had experienced it at DIA while flying to Dubai on Lufthansa.
Thank you, sir. We very much...
Another question for me. I would like to ask you, aren't we as U.S. citizens?
If you, excuse me, let me, please. You have about 6 people behind you. We appreciate your opinions very much, but I think we'll have to move on to the next questioner.
But I am asking a question.
All right.
Aren't we as U.S. citizens who believe in democracy, freedom, and justice, responsible or not, for the victims that fell in New York and in the Pentagon, and in Iraq every day U.S. young people die, and in Afghanistan, due to the criminal lobbyists in Washington, the criminal Jewish lobby? Thank you.
I didn't quite understand the second one, but the first one was about racial profiling in this country, because he has experienced it.
Yeah, there is someone who is standing, waiting. Please, come forward. Do you have a question?
Well, he was asking about racial profiling and how he's experienced it in the country and what you guys think about that.
Oh, okay. Racial profiling?
You are the American.
Okay. You mean at the airports?
He said DIA, I think, so.
Oh, CIA. Well, look, I...
DIA, Denver International Airport.
All right. I did serve, as I quit practicing medicine, I ended up being a president of the Arab American Anti-Discrimination Committee 4 weeks before September 11. My life changed so diametrically different from somebody who was, a doctor and medical staff and country clubs and all that, to becoming the president of ADC, Arab American Discrimination Committee. Within 48 hours of September 11, I received 45 different emails and faxes. All of them were very obnoxious, and many of them were threatening to my life and, go home and all that. Obviously, none of these people knew me or knew anything about me. They knew that this is the president of Arab whatever entity in Washington. So this is the attitude that developed immediately after September 11. That was followed by the Patriot Act, which we tried to ameliorate as much as we did. And many things were codified that pretty much discriminated against people of Arab and Muslim origin without specifying it exactly like such. People have, were ejected out of airplanes. We, in fact, sued 3 different airway companies, airlines, and they all kind of settled the agreements before it went to court. There was a pushback, in other words. Look, I don't know about the law, but I know about human beings. There is a sense of suspicion and dislike, and sometimes beyond, of things Arab Muslim in this country by a certain segment of the population. That's it. And it is mostly out of that experience, if not before. People can like or dislike anything they want, but having lived for 4 decades in this country and appreciate in the most fundamental sense what it offers, not just people who are immigrants, but people everywhere. You still have a country of laws here. We have a constitution, and we have the battles to fight within the legal system to make sure that these prejudices do not reflect themselves legally in any way, shape, or form, and to fight the political fight so that this thing is not extrapolated externally to the Arab and Muslim world.
As a student here at Boulder who is interested in the culture, I'm taking Arabic and I'm going to Cairo for a full academic year this coming fall, and actually I plan to do Peace Corps after that. I'm wondering if you guys think that's an effective way to bridge cultures to win Islamic hearts and minds, or Muslim hearts and minds. But also, the problem is that there's only 6% of Peace Corps volunteers actually go to the Middle East. There are only 2 programs, one in Jordan and another in Morocco. So, A, do you think it's an effective way? And then B, do you think we increase our presence through the Peace Corps in the Middle East?
May I? I think this is wonderful. And this is the legacy that goes back probably 40 years from the times of Kennedy. And this was probably one of the best things that America offered the world. And I applaud you for doing it. I think if you have a choice between the two, start with Jordan, because you'll be close enough to Palestine and you will feel the pain that the rest of the Muslim world feel over Palestine. And it will be by your very presence, by the goodwill that you will carry as a young American, you will be giving hope to younger Arabs who have not yet given up in America as the older Arabs have. And I may say, there is a very creative experiment that was started by some Americans in Vermont called the Seeds of Peace. I don't know how many of you heard about it, but it is a very promising, it was very promising experiment by which Palestinian children, Israeli children, third nationals from the Middle East, Muslim, Christians, Jews, lived together for a summer. These were all young, and they related to each other as children, related to each other as human beings, and this went on for nearly 10 years. It was disrupted only 2 years ago, or last year, when the war in Gaza started. So I think what you're doing is great. I hope that you will support efforts like that, that some of you would probably pick up this enterprise, Seeds of Peace, and rekindle it. Instead of Vermont this time, do it in Colorado. Thank you.
As a woman, I have trouble accepting countries that repress and treat women unfairly. Are there Islamic countries where women have equal rights to men, and are there countries where where they don't have that, but you see hope for women?
Speaking as a woman, yes, there are. Since I was exiled from Egypt and since I was hounded out of Egypt, the First Lady of Qatar, by the name of Sheikha Moza, and I want you all to remember that name, Sheikha Moza. She took pity on me. She offered me asylum in her country. And when I went to Qatar, the closest Arab country to Egypt, I found that this lady has done a tremendous job in bringing women to the public space and in getting them through her husband, through the political system, which is not very advanced one. It is not your Westminster democracy. It is basically a tribally based country, society. And yet, through this very enlightened First Lady, she has brought women a long way. They have equal rights. They have the right to vote. Whether they are practicing or taking advantage of it is a different story. But at least She has done that much. There are other Muslim countries in which women enjoy full equality, like Turkey. On paper, like Egypt, Palestine. In all of these countries, in Lebanon, in Morocco, in all of these countries, you have women who have equal rights to vote, equal rights to public office. Some of them have made it all the way to becoming prime ministers, presidents. How many of you know that Pakistan, where my colleague come from, had a woman prime minister? That's the highest executive office in their country. How many of you know that Bangladesh, another Muslim majority country, had 2 women presidents? 2 women presidents. How many of you know that Indonesia, the biggest Muslim country, and in which Obama, by the way, spent part of his childhood, had also a president, a woman president in the largest Muslim country, Indonesia, and the 3rd largest democratic country in the world after India and the US. So there are countries. We still have a long way to go because many other countries do not. And therefore, the struggle has to go on, and I hope you will keep your enthusiasm for this issue and keep telling your congressman, your senator, to at least condition aid to any Muslim country or Muslim majority country on how they are treating their women. Thank you.
It looks as if we have time for about maybe 1, maybe 2 very quick questions and answers.
I'd like to turn the topic around slightly and ask what the Muslim world can or should do to win the hearts and minds of the West.
Yes, a very good question. I'd like to take a stab at it, picking up on the last question. The Arab and Muslim world does a very bad job of treating women. It has to be told so, and it has to be a part of the discourse nationally and internationally that they should do a better job. This business of designating women to second-class status as a practical matter is something to be challenged. There are, rays of light here and there, but there is no movement that is empowering women that is enough. Secondly, the discourse. There has to be more freedom of expression in the Arab world. That does not go by the usual things. I know what the limits of the freedom of the expression, I tell you what they are in the Arab world as it exists, with exceptions, brave exceptions that we need to do something about. One is to get an audience, you have to say bad things about the United States, bad things about Israel, and bad things about the Arab regimes, except the regime where you live. All right? This has to be challenged, and this is where the West politically has to be aware that there has to be room for expansion, for political inclusion. We're talking about elections. You cannot have meaningful elections without meaningful expression, public expression, political discourse, freedom of speech. This has to be a communal effort. There are many things that can be done, and I think we should not, in case I did not mention it earlier on Islam, there are many terrible aspects that are taking place by Arabs and Muslims in the name of Islam. This absolutely should be confronted by Arabs and Muslims. Don't do this in my name. More of this needs to be done.
Dr. Hassan has left, and Dr. Asali, you also used the word engagement, and I'm curious if you would give us a specific example or examples of what you meant by benign engagement.
Benign engagement. This is the op-ed I'm yet to write. Please let me reserve the title for it. It is the opposite in spirit of the axis of evil. okay, where you define a whole people or a whole country or something as, you know, you guys are bad and, you know, you are preordained to receive your due. What we need is a general policy to this effect applied to every state. These are different states with different nationalities, different laws, different customs, and different rulers. We need to engage all entities with the view that we're not against you. We're for ourselves. First off, you know, let's be clear, we are defending the national interest of the United States, and we want to be your friends, but if you know, we extend our hands, suddenly you're not our friend and you're going to be our enemy, we're going to treat you as such. We are not going to start by assuming that you are a source of danger for us and a source of trouble. And all these programs, that many wonderful programs that started in the 40s, in the 50s, in the 60s, et cetera, all of them have been you know, underfunded. This is on the level of, you know, the engagement of the public. There are many things that the United States, as a government and as policymaker, needs to revisit, and it is revisiting. That reflects the very same spirit. And I think this has to be part of the engagement with the political leaders and the opposition on the outside.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I think this is the last question, so I just have an announcement. We ask that everybody who is not staying for the next panel leave as quickly as possible so we can avoid the mess we had coming in. So thank you guys very much.
Yes, and thanks to our panelists.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Thank you very much. Inspiration. Inspiration.
That's great. Thank you for the wonderful panel. Thank you.
It was very good. Thank you so much. The audience knew what they wanted, and they got it. That's what I think.
Okay, quickly.